Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, May 15th, the Ides of May. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, importuning you to go to commentary.org to read our June issue, the contents of our June issue. We discussed yesterday A. Greenwald's magisterial piece, The Woke Jihad. There is much, much more there that is extraordinarily rich. Our own Matt Continetti sitting here with the piece on how Biden is lousy at politics, which we might be getting to in just a second. I have a piece on why Biden might actually want to believe that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza and that he has troubles in Michigan, what psychological benefit he accrues from that, and many other things. So that's the June issue of Commentary at commentary.org. You can read a few things, and then we ask you to subscribe. It's time for you to subscribe if you are not subscribing, because it also helps to support the continued daily publication of this podcast, which features the following cast of characters: executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And the Washington Commentary columnist in whose column the Biden is lousy at politics article appears, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Matt, Biden is not on the ballot, was not on the ballot last night in various state primaries, but of course the looming shadow of the presidential race is casting its pall over everything. So you have some interesting takeaways from what was an uncommonly surprising late in the election cycle primaries.
Well, what's interesting, John, is my profession for the last 2 decades, as you are well aware, is covering national politics, and I my entire life have loved national politics up until the past 6 months, where I have avoided the topic. It's appeared very sludgy to me, if that's even a word. I wanted to stay away. Everything's been predictable. I thought Trump was going to win the nomination beginning in 22. But I woke up this morning to the results in the primaries in West Virginia, Maryland, Nebraska, and I'm fascinated by some of the results. So I'm just going to walk our listeners through them and point out what struck me, if that's okay. I think the first thing that needs to be said about the Maryland primary is that David Trone, the Total Wine founder, who is a House member and was running to become the Democratic nominee for Senate, and who spent $60 million in a primary, $60 million, might as well have lit all that money on fire, because the establishment candidate, also Brooks, that's her last name, won the nomination. And that is just an incredible exercise in political folly. If I had $60 million, I would not be spending it on a political campaign. There was another race of note in the Maryland House. Sarah Elspeth, who was a state senator, I believe, and backed by AIPAC, defeated a man named Harry Dunn, who was a Capitol police officer on January 6th, and who was not someone that the pro-Israel community was excited about, to say the least. So that was good. And that, in fact, was my overall takeaway from last night, which is that the normies seem to be doing pretty well here. We had in West Virginia, in another House primary, an individual who was on the other side of the line on January 6th, a man named Derek Evans, who had actually gone to prison for his participation in the Capitol riot. He lost a House primary. So he was defeated, and the more traditional Republican candidate won that race. In the Senate primary in West Virginia, Jim Justice, who was the McConnell candidate, the current governor, he won easily. The Senate Republican primary in Maryland, Larry Hogan, my man Larry, he won very easily. And in Nebraska, Don Bacon, who's been a kind of a controversial normie Republican in the House of Representatives, if there is such a creature, he won his primary very easily. So all of the angst about Ukraine and MAGA does not seem to have made itself visible in some of these primary results. And moreover, Nikki Haley, who is essentially a zombie candidate for president, having dropped out of the race in March, she pulled 20% of the Republican primary vote in Maryland. No surprise. Maryland's pretty blue, at least the suburbs are. 18% in Nebraska. And again, no surprise, 9% in West Virginia. But the fact that she's still winning double digits or close to double digits in West Virginia is really interesting to me. And it suggests that the Haley voter is going to play some kind of undefined role in the November result, whether most of that vote goes to Trump, whether a lot of it goes to RFK Jr., or it splits between those two, whether some of it goes to Biden, or whether a lot of it just stays home. In a presidential contest that's going to be very close in just a few states, the Haley voter could make a big difference, which raises the question, why isn't anyone trying to appeal to them?
Okay, I did some math, which is always a mistake.
Your favorite pastime.
I always did some math, but I want to talk a little later about the math I did on some of the Biden numbers about Gaza and voter support for Gaza. But Haley pulling 18-19% in Nebraska, which is of course a rock-ribbed Republican state, although it has this famous split congressional, it has this famous split vote because there are two ways to win electoral votes in Nebraska. One of the two states where you can actually split the electoral vote, Maine being the other. Nebraska, she gets 18%. So first thing you have to say is, if you're like a cynical Trump person, you would say, listen, the primary electorate is really small compared to the electorate in November, right? Maybe it's 40% of what you can expect in terms of Republican turnout when you get to November. So that 18%, look, it's not, we prefer it to be 100% for Trump, but look, whatever, we can live with it. But if we extrapolate out from a state like Nebraska to a larger country, or even to the battleground states, let's say, so let's say 1 in 5 primary voters, or 1 in 6 primary voters, to be generous to Trump, doesn't want to vote for Trump and is trying to make it clear that they don't want to vote for Trump. But that the electorate is then twice or more than twice that size. So then you get to, it's like 1 in 12 Republican voters are going to do whatever they can not to vote for Trump. Now, when you get to November, in both parties, there are people who vote the other way. That's always been the case, particularly Democratic Party was 44% of the country, and Ronald Reagan won 50% of the national vote in 1980 when Republicans were 22%. Splitting tickets or only being nominally in one party or the other is a traditional thing, but less and less and less traditional as we have been polarized. If 1 in 12 Republicans actually votes against Trump, and this is a close election, that's bad. I'm now not talking about what the Biden numbers will be among Democrats. But again, even though right now this is not what polling says, the Democratic Party tends to be larger in aggregate than the Republican Party. And so, Biden can lose more Democrats than Trump can lose Republicans. This is a real thing, and if we get yet again into a circumstance in which the 6 or 7 battleground states get razor thin, which I think is what you should actually expect, and not believe that the New York Times Siena poll that it's going to be 12 points that Trump wins in Nevada state, or Arizona, a state that he didn't win in 2020. These numbers have to be taken into account, whether or not the voters should be appealed to or not. This is, I'm not voting for Trump. Now, maybe, again, you could try to get them for Biden. But even if they stay home, that's effectively kind of a vote for Biden.
Yeah, I would just, our friends at the Liberal Patriot have a new newsletter out this morning that I thought speaks to this topic, because they, as is their wont, commissioned a pretty big poll with 4,000 registered voters, and they co-commissioned this poll with an organization called Blueprint, and they asked Haley voters, who would you actually pull the lever for in a two-way race? What they found was that most of these voters do go to Trump, but it's not a majority. It's 38%. Another 24% are unsure in a two-party race. Biden only gets 19% of these voters. And then in the three-way race that includes RFK Jr. alongside Trump and Biden, those numbers drop again. RFK pulling 24%, Trump 31%, Biden goes to 12%. So I completely agree with what you're saying, but it does seem to me it might be less of a problem for Trump than it could appear, because these voters seem to, as I said earlier, they seem to scatter in all directions. Right. And I continue to believe that the better RFK does, the worse it is for Biden.
So what does that mean?
I also want to know where those Kennedy votes are going to. That like maybe who's their second choice or something like that, because you just kind of. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we're looking at some of the polls, and I don't feel like he's going to get quarter of the vote in Nevada, for example. Places like this. So that's the other question: is that those voters? I think we assume that a good chunk of those RFK voters are not going to be RFK voters in the general, and where they go matters also, just like the Haley voters, right? And we don't really know that. So,
well, okay, but let's talk about what it means that RFK is scoring the numbers that he has been scoring now for 6 months. What it means is that both the Republicans and the Democrats are going to have to spend real money against him to get to knock his numbers down and to make it clear to voters that he's weird and strange and a conspiracy freak. And I'm not talking about the people for whom those are all positives. And I'm talking about people who are looking at him as a safe harbor because they can't bear to vote for either major candidate. Well, over time, you can actually degrade such a political figure by shining harsh sunlight on him and his views and get them to say, well, he's not the normie choice. Like, even Trump is more normal than this guy. But you have to do it. You're going to have to actually dedicate the resources and the focus to it. And that's something that neither candidate expected. And because we don't know how they would break, we don't know what would happen when they're knocked down. I'm not sure that either of them knows what message to impart against RFK Jr., in time. It's just an interesting political wrinkle. And then of course, there is the possibility, which is what happened with Ross Perot, that they can't knock him down. I mean, Tucker Carlson, in the pages of the Weekly Standard before he went batshit crazy, 28 years ago, wrote a series of pieces about Ross Perot and his political views. They were pretty definitive. They were really startling, though they were 96, not 92. But they were all about how crazy Ross Perot was. And you could do a lot against Ross Perot, and Ross Perot still got 9%. He got 19% of the vote in 96. He got 9 in 92. He got 9% of the vote in 96. That's a big vote. If RFK Jr. got 9% of the vote, there's no even, I don't even know how you model that race at this point. He didn't win any states.
The real issue for Kennedy is he able to get on the ballot? And so far, the key states that he's been on the ballot, Michigan, Nevada, and California, can he widen that out? Now, some of the professionals that I talked to say, actually, it's pretty easy to get on the ballot, and that media types are exaggerating the difficulty. But
he says he's got enough to get on Georgia. He says,
right,
which would.
In any case, I mean, his presence, I just continue to believe it can't, there's this debate. Does it hurt Trump more? Does it hurt Biden more? It's clear that the Trump people seem to detect a threat because they've really been pushing the idea that he is a super lefty guy. But I can't help thinking, just if you have a third party candidate who's getting more than 3% of the vote nationally and in swing states, that's going to spell doom for the incumbent president. I mean,
Really, no.
every race.
Lay it out. Lay it out. Why?
Well, I've just looked
particularly in danger.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of a historical precedent. I kind of looked at races going back to 1912 when Teddy Roosevelt was the third party candidate. And of course, he did very well, one of the most successful third party candidates. And the incumbent party, William Taft Republicans, lost. That's how Woodrow Wilson became president. And you can look at 68, where George Wallace, running as an independent, did very well. The incumbent party, Hubert Humphrey's Democrats, they lost. That's how Nixon became president. In 1980, we had John Anderson, the liberal Republican, who was very worried about those crazy Reaganites taking over his party. He got above 3%, and the incumbent party, Jimmy Carter's Democrats, lost. And then again in 2000, 92, we already talked about. So I guess the exception would be 96, where Perot did pretty well, but the incumbent candidate won in Clinton. But in 2000,
also, I mean, he prevailed by 9. I mean, Clinton beat Dole by 9.
Dole was not the best.
Perot,
Dole was not the best challenger, and the country was
happier
in a pretty good state in 96.
Yeah.
But in 2000, Nader, I think they got something like 3%, and the incumbent party lost. And then in 2016. You had the combination of Jill Stein, you had some Gary Johnson. And combined, they barely cracked. I think just a few percent. But in swing states, it was a little bit.
They got 6%.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's above 3%.
Yeah.
And in swing states, they got higher, and the incumbent party, Hillary Clinton's Democrats, lost. So with that in mind, and of course, history is not a big data set, but with that in mind and just how bad Biden is, I can only help.
It sounds like you're saying something very logical. It sounds like you're saying the mere presence, the mere existence of a legitimate third party candidate in a race is a comment on the incumbent, and for obvious reasons, not on the challenger, which makes sense. I mean, that sounds like
there was no serious. I mean, I wrote a piece after the 2010 midterm Republican blowout about how what would tell about Obama's political future was whether he got a realistic party challenge inside the Democratic primary in 2012. And I looked at Russ Feingold and the senator from Michigan as the obvious person to do that, running at Obama from the left. And when that didn't happen, it became clear that Obama was a stronger candidate than he might have appeared, having lost 63 House seats, because no Democrat was willing to do even what Dean Phillips, the congressman, tried to do haltingly against Biden. And there was no serious third party candidate against Obama in 2012. So it does scramble, but there are these two factors, right? One factor is RFK in the race, and the other factor is this anti-Trump vote within closed Republican primaries. Nebraska is a closed primary. This wasn't the strategy to get Democrats to cross over in open primaries like in New Hampshire and vote for Haley to send a message. These are Republicans expressing themselves, and while some of them are doubtless going to come home, as the Liberal Patriot poll shows, right now, that's a pretty serious. Now, maybe it's a gimme vote to vote against Trump now because he can't lose anyway, and so you don't like him. But in the end, you're not going to like Biden better, probably.
I think what Matt's rundown of the primaries also points to something else that's interesting that's happening. That I think it's been happening since before the primaries, but this shows more evidence of it, which is that I think with Trump tied up with his legal problems, there's been a kind of an unexpected side effect here, whereby the energy that he would normally put into MAGA and MAGA types and MAGA candidates is waning. It's the sting is a bit out of it, because he's dealing with his own mishigas. And you saw this also in, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene's failed attempt to take down Mike Johnson. You see Trump sort of alongside Mike Johnson, and you see Trump with Doug Burgum. So there's a kind of a cleavage opening up. It's not a confrontation, but it's just by virtue of the circumstances, he's drifting apart a little bit from his support, not his supporters, but those who sort of emulate him on the next level down. And I think it's good for him and bad for them.
And good for the party in general, because I think Trump really hates not being the center of attention. He's not good at handling that. I mean, that was, a big thing in 2016. One of the reasons I kept thinking, no way this guy could win is because Hillary Clinton would have, the hatchings of a bad news cycle, and he would step on it. She would faint at the World Trade Center ceremony, and he would know, like the Kool-Aid man come busting through the brick wall. Like, he just couldn't let her fall on her own.
No, it's very
and
good
so
for him.
I feel like this stuff with Marjorie Taylor Greene and the others is like, no, I'm the guy who does loony things.
Right.
I'm the guy who decides purity tests.
Yeah.
If I say, you don't get to decide that Mike Johnson is or isn't MAGA. That's me. I'm the guy who does all these things, and I'm the guy you're paying attention to. It's my party, essentially.
But I think Abe is onto something, and this was true in the last 2 weeks of the 2016 election. Trump is center stage among American liberals who hate him, who are watching MSNBC 20 hours a day, hearing about how it is about time that Michael Cohen be canonized in the Catholic Church, despite his membership in the tribe of Abraham. And that sort of thing. And they're just like eating up the porn. They can't get enough of it. They're just there. And otherwise, Trump is not on stage at all. We're talking nationally about weird crime stuff, the disorder on college campuses and in neighborhoods, Biden's infirmities, all of that. And to the
economy,
Trump and the economy. And to the extent that Trump is not the center of attention, it is better for him not to be that. They are desperate to make this trial the center of attention. Even now, particularly now that it looks like none of the other three trials is going to get going before November. This is all they got, and it's going to be over in a couple of weeks. Now, maybe the verdict will be enough to kind of alter the trajectory of everything. But I mean, this really should be a lesson for Trump, which is don't be the crazy person. Let this election be about Biden.
Right.
When Trump is not center stage, the election is about the incumbent, not about, one of the things that Obama pulled off in 2012 was that he made the election about the rival, not about the incumbent. And because his record was actually pretty lousy, people don't even remember this. People didn't like Obamacare. That was his signature accomplishment. And all of his economic moves were terrible. And he was at 41% in the polls through most of 2012. But he managed to make his rival the subject of the election. And if Biden can't do that with Trump,
But he's going to have help because, as you said, in a couple of weeks, Trump is going to be out. Like the reverse of the situation, the reverse of the expectation sort of happened, right? Like we expected the trial, people expected the trial to keep Trump center stage, but it didn't really keep Trump center stage. Only Trump keeps Trump center stage. So in a couple of weeks, if that all goes back, if that reverts to the mean, doesn't that mean Trump goes out and
okay? Wait, let me give you
Trump
two
again?
counter examples to your Trump is going to go out and be a crazy person. Number one, how AI is machine learning, like it learns as it goes and things get better. So we've heard now for, 8 months that Trump's campaign is pretty good, right? They're solid. They know what they're doing. They're doing things right. They're pursuing a certain strategy. They're going like this. Well, at some point, you have to give Trump credit for the fact that he hasn't done something to blow up his team. Like he really isn't. He is sort of taking them, for what they are. And so that's one thing. Thing number two is that he has no reason to start going crazy if things are going his way. Either he's crazy or he's crazy like a fox, and I don't think he's crazy at all. And so something else is going on with him.
So this might be a good time to introduce another topic that's breaking this morning, which is President Biden has issued a kind of ridiculous video where, like a wrestling promo, he challenges Donald Trump to two debates, one in June and the other in September. This would be outside the Commission on Presidential Debates, the structure that's run most of the debates for the past almost 4 decades, that Trump didn't want anything to do with. Now Biden is saying he doesn't want to work with the commission either, and he proposes this alternative. So Biden released a video this morning right before we began the podcast, and then Donald Trump just issued this truth on his Truth website, and I'm going to read beginning halfway through it. Trump says, "I'm ready and willing," capital letters, "to debate Crooked Joe at the 2 proposed times in June and September. I would strongly recommend more than 2 debates, and for excitement purposes, a very large venue. Although Biden is supposedly afraid of crowds, that's only because he doesn't get them. Just tell me when, I'll be there." And then in quotes, Trump wrote, "Let's get ready to rumble." So if there's a place where the parts of the Trump political persona that alienate Nikki Haley voters might be visible, it would be, I think, one of these 2 debates. And it's interesting to me that, one, Biden is the person who came out and proposed the dates, because that is an acknowledgement that Biden needs the debates. He needs something to change the narrative of this election, which is going very poorly for him. But also interesting that Trump immediately responds and says, "Okay, let's do it." The other aspect of it that bears mentioning is these 2 debates, I think, would be well timed in the sense that they would happen prior to the beginning of early voting. And
well, Biden says that explicitly, right? Or
right.
Biden's team say they want the debates to take place before people.
Well, Trump's team was saying that too.
Right.
Trump's one reason Trump didn't like the old-fashioned way of doing it was most of the debates took place in October, when now in America, in 2020, half the country had voted basically, or half the votes had been cast. So
if you're leading the polls,
the other
maybe
part
you
of
want
it,
that.
just the other part of the timing though is if it's June, September, they're weird bookends on the 2 party conventions. So you could have a debate and then you could have whoever's the loser. Well, then the next convention, the first convention is the RNC, I believe, in July. So that would become the story. And then the DNC, and then the final debate. It would make for a pretty lively roller coaster of political events happening earlier than we've ever had them happen before. I think that's what's interesting is the general election, if they go ahead with this plan, is moved up to basically happen in the summer rather than post Labor Day as we've been used to it happening.
It's so interesting. Before we
sense?
discuss it, Seth, I need to tell everybody about our friends at Boll and Branch, today's advertiser. Abe, you're sleeping on those Boll and Branch sheets. Your wife.
I sure am. Yes.
Your 100-pound dog, your 12-pound dog.
Happily.
There you all are.
Blissfully dozed off.
Okay.
He fell asleep during the show. Boll and Branch is so comfortable.
It's so just even the memory of the Boll and Branch sheets
puts me in the right frame of mind.
Yes. Atmosphere.
Yes.
that isn't just the result of my excessive talking. Anyway, they are the perfect way to start upgrading your sleep, Boll and Branch signature sheets, which come in 14 versatile colors in all sizes from twin up to California King. They feel incredible on night one. They get softer with every single wash, made with the finest 100% organic cotton, completely free from toxins, buttery soft yet super breathable. Loved by millions of sleepers, and they bring that 30-night worry-free guarantee so you can wash, style, and sleep in their sheets for an entire month. And if you don't love them, send them right back. And it's not just sheets. Boll and Branch has the airiest blankets, most cloud-like duvets, fluffiest pillows, and so much more. So sleep better with the softest, most breathable bedding from Boll and Branch. Get 15% off your order when you use promo code commentary at bollandbranch.com. That's BOLLANDBRANCH.com. Promo code commentary. Exclusions apply. See site for details. Seth, I interrupted you, so please.
I was just going to say that I think if you're winning in the polls, you don't want the disruption before early voting. So this is an interesting case where Trump in the past, I would understand maybe why, but I feel like it's a smart move by the Biden campaign, because we've been saying all along they have to at least acknowledge that something has to change. The fundamentals of the race are not good for Biden. I know that there was a poll yesterday had him up a few points nationally, I believe, was the Ipsos poll. And so, he gets some good news here and there, but I think everybody understands that fundamentally the race doesn't look great for an incumbent right now, and it doesn't look particularly good for him. So he wants that. But Trump, I would not want that if I were Trump and I were staying out of, even if it was because I was sitting in a courtroom, like those Russian courtrooms where they sit you in a glass box like a mime or something. Even if that's the case, whatever the reason, Biden is tripping over his shoelaces and the race is going the way it is. This is exactly the sort of thing that Trump could be walking into that would upset the equilibrium that has so far helped him. So he's a better debater than most people think because he's good at the show. And so it's not that he's weak in that format, but it's just, I think it's just an object in motion.
Okay.
You stays in motion if you're the leader.
I think that Trump was great for him in the debates where there were 8 people on stage. His debate with Biden was a disaster for him. It was a disaster for him. It was not a good format for him because he couldn't jump in and deliver the punchline and only be on 30% of the time, get the big hit and then go back in. Now, it's a long time since that debate. It's 4 years. Biden is not the same person that he was, and Trump appears pretty much to be the same person that he was. So that set of circumstances may alter themselves.
If the campaign is as good as people are saying it is, if they have a team that will say to him, "Look, you didn't do well in that circumstance. You were too out of control. You were like a fire hose." And all Biden had to do was say, "Just shut up already," to win the point. You cannot. Biden's obviously counting on a replay of that, and you can't just give that to him on a platter. Now, I don't know if Trump's capable of not being that guy.
What's interesting is there are a few other aspects to the Biden team proposal that we should mention, and this gets to why Trump in that Truth post I was reading wanted to have a NASCAR-sized crowd. Apparently, Biden's campaign does not want a live audience for these debates. That's noteworthy, I think. They must be worried that the crowd will be against Biden, as most people are, or that they'll start chanting, "Let's go, Brandon," during the middle of the debate. Another part is that by excising the Committee on Presidential Debates, the 2 major party nominees can effectively block RFK Jr., who we were just talking about, from participating.
That's the important thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Number one. And number two, the Commission on Presidential Debates should die.
It's dead.
The commission, it is dead.
They just killed it today.
Dead, and it should be dead. It should be dead anyway. This unwarranted kind of creation.
Well, when it was Jim Lehrer It's okay. Jim Lehrer, he could be the voice of America, bringing the people together in the debate. That's fine. It's Jim Lehrer. But once Jim retired, the commission went
imagine
downhill quickly.
Yeah. First of all,
it's like Jeopardy. It's hard to keep, the name or the Daily Show after Jon Stewart. At some point, it's really the guy who was host, not the desk he was in.
Right. But I think the central thing is all of us who actually are interested in debates and like debates and think that they're more than just showbiz, you don't want the audience. The audience is terrible. The audience ruins these debates, and it creates this bizarre, sitcom effect where the producers are telling you where to laugh, or how big the laugh is, or however you want to slice it. And I think a lot of us think that the best debate in modern times, the debates between Cheney and Lieberman in 2000, and I think Ryan and Biden in 2012 was audienceless. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, I could be wrong. It doesn't, but Cheney Lieberman was like the model of a spectacularly good debate. There's no reason to have an audience. They shouldn't have an audience. The audience is 90 million people on television. You don't need a laugh track. You don't need partisans in the crowd.
And I think it's especially true for Biden because an audience is another element you have to manage. You have to play to the crowd. You have to play to the TV and to the crowd, and they're two different things. Trump is like a comic that does crowd work. He plays to the crowd. He responds to them. He responds to their energy, to where they're at. And I don't think Biden is capable of doing that at all.
One other thing in the proposal, apparently the Biden campaign wants the mics cut off during candidate responses in order to prevent the crosstalk, which turned that first presidential debate in 2020 into the worst presidential debate in the history of the United States of America, where not only were the two major party nominees shouting at each other simultaneously, but the moderator also decided that he would begin screaming at the two candidates, turning it into a incredible debacle. So the Biden campaign is suggesting no comments from Trump when Biden is giving an answer. We can understand why, because Biden is in the state he is in. Trump crosstalk would seriously scramble, I believe, whatever Biden wants to say. On the other hand, as we're recording this, Sean Hannity is on Fox and Friends saying, actually, the mic cutoff would be good because it will allow America to see Biden without any Trump interruption. So I guess we're just beginning the opening bids here on what these debates might look like. What's interesting to me is, one, Biden came out of the gate saying, sure, I'll debate. Here are the two dates, cutting out the commission and setting up an actual possibility that they will meet for at least one debate before early voting begins.
I think that everybody's got this right, that what this is an acknowledgement of is Biden realizing that there need to be exogenous events to change the trajectory or the dynamic of the race, and that it's worth the risk to do this. And that's interesting because what we heard earlier in the week is this piece in Axios that says Biden doesn't believe the polls. Now, I don't know whether I believe that Biden doesn't believe the polls or not, or whether this is some weird spin. I was looking back at stuff in 1992. Actually, Jonah Goldberg sent me an article that I myself had written for the last issue of National Review before the 92 election, which I had no memory of reading, that begins by saying, George H.W. Bush believes that he is going to win this race. Nobody else in the Bush White House believes this to be the case, but he is assured and determined that that is the case. I was reporting out my first book at the time, and so I was talking to people every day, 5 or 6 people a day, and this is what I had heard. I had forgotten this, but there is about Biden if that is the case, the eerie similarities between the 92 election and the 2024 election would be manifesting themselves in the peculiar confidence of the president himself that he is doing better than he is in fact doing. If he's willing to start debating Trump in June, that probably isn't true. And that story, which was some weird bravado that, Axios, which is the stenographer for the Biden White House, got from somebody who was deciding that this was the spin that they wanted to let out in some fashion or other. And it may even have been that story that led them to say, no, we got to go debate. They know what the polls say. I mean, you can't have 17 polls saying that Biden is going to lose, is now, if the election were held today, Trump would win 312 electoral votes and say, we're winning. It just doesn't. I mean, you may not be losing and it may be early, but you can't say we're winning. I'm sorry. Like, that's demented. And there are many things, and Biden may have dementia, but he's not demented. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a delay. It's like a radio 7-second delay for for swear words or something, because he can read the polls, but his reactions to things are so slow. I mean, his reaction to he announced that he was withholding certain bombs from Israel. The reaction was swift and somehow unexpected. And now he's sort of backtracking, saying, well, we've got this $1 billion arms, we're going to go forward in the coming years. We've got more. We're releasing more weapons, as if, sort of making up for it. But the polls, and we've said this since October, the polls never showed him needing to placate the Arab American community in Michigan. This is just one example. They never showed him having to do that. So there's something that he does. He knows, he's not stupid. He knows that the fundamentals of this race are not good for him, because it's written out there in plain English. But he does have this problem where he's not responding to things until after it becomes some kind of why isn't he responding to reality? Because the things that he does, nothing has changed since. So, I think it's true that he can read the polls, but I don't think he can read them very well. I mean, I don't know any other explanation for the fact that it takes what feels like 1,000,000 years for him to waste, months at a time before responding to something that has not changed in those months since he responded.
I just want to say that my mood has changed suddenly over the course of this podcast, because, as I was saying, I began the podcast very happy that I could talk about some good news in politics and the presence of the normie voters and interesting results and the AIPAC supported candidate winning in Maryland. And as we talk about the prospect of the presidential debate, I just found my mood darkening and souring.
I want to lift your spirits.
I'm now so depressed again because I don't want to watch the debate.
This is a mistake, because we need variety. You were saying that the problem was that in January everything was foretold. Right. I wrote this piece back in January about how we were living in a kind of no exit hell, because the race had been exactly what it was pretty much from the moment that Trump came in after the November elections, and that nothing was changing. And now maybe there is the possibility
some unpredictability
to talk about.
Yes, that's true. But you know how this is going to go
also,
down.
Next week, okay, I'm not going to anticipate, or I don't want to jinx anything, but next week we're going to probably get another thrilling result out of the primaries when George Latimer defeats Jamal Bowman in the Westchester Bronx congressional race that will be the first serious electoral challenge of the Democratic Party's turn toward the squad and toward Hamas. Basically, everything
Inshallah.
is looking, inshallah, exactly. But everything is looking like Latimer is in the catbird seat.
Isn't that a month from now?
Oh, I thought it was end of May. Is it
I
June?
say it's June 25th.
Okay, well, okay, so I'm
So we
wrong.
have a month to. What
I'm
I
sorry.
thought
So
you were
the
going to go
Biden's-
was,
I'm sorry.
as soon as the Trump trial is over, the Hunter Biden trial will begin.
Oh. But the Trump trial is never going to be over. Here's my new interpretation of that. Like, so Michael Cohen is now on the stand, and they still haven't gotten to the actual crime that
That's
is
because
being
there was
alleged,
no
or
crime.
the other crime that is being alleged. And the trial has been going on for this could be Bleak House. This could be this is Jarndyce. This could last 25 years the way this is going.
The prosecution recalls Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
You didn't tell us about the wallpaper on the hotel.
Long Dong. Let's call Long Dong Silver just to just
character witness for the
going.
prosecution.
Yeah.
But on this question of whether Biden himself is not reading what is being said about him and the campaign, or is he ignoring it, or is he just reading everything completely wrong? Which I think is kind of something, John, that you mentioned in your piece for the magazine this month. Why Joe Biden has gone from friend to enemy. It's what is he doing? What is his thinking behind doing what he's doing here? It's not that he's not paying attention; he's paying attention to the wrong things.
Now, by the way, thank you for mentioning the piece, which is available, of course, on our website at commentary.org, and involves math. And once again, you don't want to rely on me on math, but I am delighted to say that Nate Silver, whom I think you can rely on for math, in his Substack yesterday, pretty much agreed with me, not by name, but pretty much came up with the same set of arguments that I do in my piece, which I want people to read. You should also read Nate's piece if you can, if you subscribe to it or give it a sample. But I'm going to read from him, not from me, and I'm going to now rely on the readers to go with him, because that's where I can cite a third party case, and there's another person instead of myself. I don't doubt that Biden's chances for re-election would be higher if there weren't a war ongoing in Gaza. This is an issue that profoundly divides the left liberal coalition that was instrumental in electing Biden and Barack Obama before him. I also don't doubt that there are some people who will vote against Biden or decide not to vote because they think he's insufficiently sympathetic to Palestine. We can come up with an estimate of just how many people this is based on the latest New York Times Siena College battleground state polls. And then he quotes from Nate Cohn's piece on it. Quote, "One exception is Israel's war in Gaza. Around 13% of the voters who say they voted for Mr. Biden last time, but do not plan to do so again, said that his foreign policy or the war in Gaza was the most important issue to their vote. And just 17% of those voters reported sympathizing with Israel over the Palestinians." And then Nate says, let's do some math here. About 51% of the country voted for Biden in 2020. Of that 51%, 14% say they don't plan to vote for Biden this time in the head-to-head matchup. Of those, 13% list Gaza or something related as their top issue. And of that 13%, 49% are more sympathetic to Palestine than to Israel. So we get 0.51 times 0.14 times 0.13 times 0.49 is 0.005. That is 0.5% of the American electorate are Joe Biden voters in 2020 who say they'll withdraw their vote from Biden because he's too far to their right on Israel. Losing 0.5% of the electorate is not trivial, given how close the 2016 and 2020 elections were in the battleground states, but it's still a small number of people in an absolute sense. So, yeah, if one state is, and then now we can go to Michigan, which is the subject of my discussion. So if Michigan is the focus of the complete obsession over the Arab American vote and Gaza, and why Biden needs to keep his distance or even go at Israel's jugular, those numbers make no sense in absolute terms. And I'm not like a statistician, but The way I came out with it is that there are somewhere between 200,000 and 350,000 Arab Americans in Michigan. It's very, very hard to tell what that number is because estimates vary and there's no census category for this. So some of this you're actually dealing with estimates by interest groups that want to say there are way more Muslims and Arabs than there are. But first of all, nationally, 2% of voters, young voters, right? That's one thing. 2% of young voters say that Gaza is their top issue. There are now 2 polls that say 2% say this, 18 to 29. There are 44 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 29. 2% of them is 880,000 people across the United States, if the poll is representative. That's 17,000 voters per state. So there are states, as we know, where that could be the margin of victory or defeat to Biden or Trump, right? That's Arizona and Georgia in particular. 2%, however, of voters say, okay, so, but there's no evidence that that's a voting issue in Arizona or Georgia, exactly, right? So whereas take inflation, which 19%, inflation in the economy add up to 19%, that's, 9 million people between the ages
But
of 18
there's
to
one
29.
important aspect about those voters, the very few voters, the 0.5% of voters that you mentioned before. How many of those can Biden still win?
Right. He'll win them anyway. The same way the Haley voter is going to end up voting for Trump. Because
If
when push
if they're
comes to shove,
winnable, he'll win them anyway, despite Gaza. But if they hate him over Gaza now, they're not going to come home over, him blasting Bibi once or twice more
right.
throughout the campaign. Like, in other
Right.
words,
Yeah.
I see those voters as basically having decided already.
Right. Now, first of all, we had, and I don't even mention this in the piece, we had an electoral result that was designed to scare Biden about the danger of the Arab American vote in Michigan with this campaign to get people to vote uncommitted, right? And 110,000 people voted uncommitted in the Democratic primary in Michigan. Except in 2020 and 2016, 80,000 people voted uncommitted. So, there was no appreciable giant gain in uncommitted as a primary choice in 2024. But again, let me just go through the numbers here. According to a very hard pro-Palestinian site called Mideast Wire that did one of those kind of vote by vote, precinct by precinct electoral dives in after 2020, Biden had surfaced 34,000 new voters in 2020 compared to Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the most Arab and Muslim districts in Michigan. So he found 34,000 voters. So let's say if he melts down among Arab American voters, of whom there are at most 170,000, maybe fewer. A state he won by 155,000 votes. 100% of them aren't going to vote against him. Most of them are going to vote for him. Maybe he'll go down from 68% to 50%. They're still voting for him. Biden's election in Michigan, he won by 3%, is not threatened by the Arab American vote. It's threatened by the economy and by everything else that threatens Biden in 2024. So I ask you this question. Why are they focused on this? It just doesn't make sense, except
your theory.
Psychologically, right. And my theory is that they want to believe that Biden has a problem with Arab American voters and that the problem is Gaza and that there's a significant number of people who want to believe this is a problem. Why? Because it's out of his hands. It's not about his age. It's not about the economy and inflation. It's not about
The border.
Hunter. It's about Israel and Gaza, and he can't do anything about it except now So he is grasping at I'm in trouble because of things that have nothing to do with me, really. And then over time, he then makes them about him. Like that, the weird part is that the psychological benefit that he gets from saying my reelection bid is jeopardized by this war in Gaza, then becomes, oh yeah, what are you going to do about it? Then he starts moving, right? Then he sort of attacks Israel. Then he goes after the aid, but then he wants to withhold it. He even wants to withhold the JDAMs, this technology that allows you to take a dumb bomb and turn it into a smart bomb, which he should want because that will minimize civilian casualties to an extraordinary degree. So even there, he's losing the thread of the value of believing that he's got a problem with Israel and Gaza. And so there is something interesting going on here. He does not have an electoral problem with the war in Israel and the war against, the war against Hamas. He just doesn't. No poll says that he has a problem. However, in 1980, when it was perceived that Jimmy Carter was basically an anti-Semite and that he had sided with Andrew Young at the UN, who was trying to condemn Israel and all of that, in 1980, didn't matter that much. Ronald Reagan got 39% of the Jewish vote in 1980, and in some calculations, probably more. Because in the most Jewish district in the country, that was the district that Emmanuel Seller had represented for 50 years, that Steve Solars represented, and that then Anthony Weiner represented that's like 80 years, the most Jewish district in the country. Reagan got 50% of the vote in that district in 1980. So he may not, he may have some troubles with the Arab American vote. But he also may have real trouble with the Jewish vote. And you know where the Jewish vote could matter and have impact? In Pennsylvania. And you know the one state in this country that he cannot afford to lose and still have the electoral map work out for him? Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the hinge state for Biden. So I don't think the Jewish vote matters electorally, but if Pennsylvania is, which he won by 80,000 votes, in 2020, if the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania goes 50-50 against him, now again that's a sort of a wild supposition. He'll lose Pennsylvania, and that's it. That's all she wrote. Trump wins the presidency. So he's weird. He's being weird. He's being crazy. I think there's a reason for it, and it's either that he wants to believe this for the reasons I've laid out, or simply that Matt is correct in his superb piece, also in the June commentary, which is that Biden is bad at politics. Do you want to?
Right, so which theory does this piece of news fit into? The Title IX stuff. They've announced Title IX gender identity being added to Title IX protections, which means that schools. This is according to the administration officials. Schools could violate Title IX if a transgender person isn't allowed to use the bathroom aligned with their gender identity, or if they are not referred to by their chosen pronoun. Why is he getting into this stuff? Where is this coming from?
Well, there's a lot of campaign money behind it. And also, there's a big move on the part of the administration to issue as many regulations now, because pretty soon the Congressional Review Act will kick in, and a Republican trifecta next year could easily repeal
Will you explain
these regulations.
That? Because that's a very interesting point. So the Congressional Review Act
it's a great piece of legislation.
Yes, it is.
I love it, and I think it should be expanded. But basically, it says that regulations issued by the administrative state during a set time, the final months of a presidency, can be repealed by a simple act of Congress in the next Congress. And so after 2016, which brought a Republican trifecta to power, many harmful Obama regulations were wiped off the books through the simple act of Congress. It's much easier to do it through Congress than it is through the executive branch, because one, presidents never have total control over the executive branch, and two, it takes time and there are court challenges and procedural hurdles. So I love the Congressional Review Act. And right now, the Biden administration, again, another sign that they know things are not headed in their direction this fall, is trying to kind of get as much through the regulatory apparatus as possible in order to insulate these very controversial rules, like you mentioned, Seth, from congressional review next year.
I mean,
my point I want to make, John, is I just hope that we can find a way to reward you for all of your math work that you were doing and that you will have completed by the date of the election. I mean, if we can have some type of relationship with our friends.
That's what I want to be, the guy. I want to replace I've seen enough guy.
I feel like we should get Rabbi Soloveitchik to somehow get yeshiva to give you an honorary degree in applied mathematics.
In psephology?
Yeah.
I'm sorry you didn't tell us recently when your birthday was coming up, because we could have gotten you an engraved Texas Instruments calculator.
Yeah.
That's what I got for when I was bar mitzvahed 50 years ago last week. 50 years ago last week was my bar mitzvah. I got a Bowman Brain calculator, and let me tell you, that was not cheap then. That was like $75 in 1974 dollars. And you know what it could do? It could add and subtract and multiply, and if you could figure out how, it did percentages, but nobody could figure out how the percentage things worked. That's what that was, and it was
the size of a bread box.
It was like owning an Oculus, or like that headset. It was like the version of owning that Apple headset that you could watch movies on in front of your face. That's how forward-leaning I was in terms of the calculator. Yeah. But we Jews, of course, we do have the Talmudic tradition of numerical, of the very, very supernatural importance of numbers, gematria we call it, and how to look at numbers as expressions of the divine will. And so perhaps in my old age, I am becoming a Kabbalist, and you will have to come to me to find out the secrets, the supernatural secrets of the universe. Right now, I'm just trying to divine whether or not Joe Biden is an idiot or not, and that seems to be a smaller matter.
Some questions are pretty easy to answer.
Okay, Matt Connetti, having been a dual recommender on Monday, which then I piggybacked upon for a third recommendation in one day.
It's crazy on Monday.
You're back.
Well, today, I think he's also doing technically a double one, because I think that he would highly recommend the Congressional Review Act as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yes.
Well, that's what we needed on the
Commentary Recommends Twitter feed is a picture of the Congressional.
That's more a political recommendation.
Yeah, okay.
This is, but first, thank you, John. Today, I'd like to recommend a new book that was just published this week. It's called Late Admissions: Confessions of a Black Conservative by Glenn Loury, the Brown University economist. I read the book in galleys earlier this spring, and it was one of those books that occasionally come across my desk that once I open it, I really can't put it down. And I read Glenn Loury's memoir within a couple days. It is a very fascinating document. Loury comes right out of the box and says, I'm an unreliable narrator of my own memoir. But he also adds, I'm going to disclose things to you that no one else in an academic memoir or the memoir of a public intellectual would disclose. And Glenn Loury is both an academic and a highly regarded, and I regard him highly, public intellectual. He is a economist, and a very smart economist and well-regarded, accomplished economist who in the 1980s began writing about race relations from a standpoint that can only be described as neoconservative. So he was contributing to Irving Kristol's Public Interest, I believe he contributed to commentary.
Sure.
Yep. And he had a very bracing take on the state of Black America in the 1980s, and definitely had the more conservative view of how Black Americans can flourish in our country, like other groups have historically. In the 90s, Glenn kind of broke from conservatism / neoconservatism, and he goes into that. It was a trio of books that kind of made him rethink some of his intellectual commitments. And he spent about a decade, about 15 years, kind of belonging to the Black left, which he had castigated earlier. And then Barack Obama was elected. And over the course of the Obama presidency, he came back to the right. And as he says in the subtitle, he now does consider himself a Black conservative. So that's the intellectual story of the book. And that in itself is worth the price of admission. And it's fascinating and interesting. And he's a great polemicist. But then there's also the personal side of the book. And Lowry's career at various points was interrupted with big breaking news about drug abuse, some extramarital affairs. And he does not shy away from this aspect of his life in these pages. I mean, at times you forget you're reading the book of a highly accomplished scholar, one of the great minds of our age, and you think that you're reading a potboiler, one with a narrative, with an anti-hero. And so the combination of those two separate books really in one volume makes Late Admission such an interesting read. And I highly recommend this new book by Glenn Loury.
I feel that I have many things to apologize for in the course of my own career, and that this is one apology to make that does not involve me having hired somebody who then turns coat and becomes an enemy of everything that I believe in different ways. But one of those three books that you mentioned as part of the moment on the right that changed Glenn's view of how the right truly felt about Black people, and that the right was not friendly to Black people, let's say, did not have the best interests of Black people in mind, was Dinesh D'Souza's The End of Racism. And that's a review that I commissioned for the Weekly Standard from Glenn. Dinesh D'Souza's book created a big stink even inside the Weekly Standard. One of the few times we actually had sort of deep editorial disagreements in the first 2 years of the Standard, because Fred Barnes, one of the troika, me, Bill Crystal, and Fred Barnes, we were sort of like the managing troika, and Fred was very upset by Glenn's review, thought it was unfair. I think Dinesh's career afterwards and everything that he has stood for afterwards proves that Glenn was right to be suspicious of Dinesh's opinion about these matters, and that Dinesh himself if he's not an unreliable narrator, he is an unreliable ideological presence and somebody inclined toward extremism, which is part of what offended Loury so much about the book and its own sort of version of a potted American history that has a kind of reverse image 1619 project about it. In some ways, I mean, I think the book itself makes it very clear that there was so much personally going on inside him and in his head and in his heart and in his soul, and a divided thing, that this was not this intellectual break with the right was more involved with some of that than one might think. But I do think there are these moments in time when intellectuals who are arguing things that are difficult for them to argue because they seem to go against their own interests or their family, they're really expressing a genuine sense of intellectual independence. And then when the side that they have joined shows wild irresponsibility or lack of fealty to first principles, it puts them in a really, really difficult position, I think, now about what it would mean to be a liberal Zionist. Not that I'm not a liberal Zionist, I'm a Zionist, but what it would mean to be a genuinely liberal Zionist in the United States after the last 7 or 8 months, and what kind of existential crisis that places you in when the people you think they're on your side, but you're not. But you just have this, you're not quite where they are there, but like this. And then they're sort of existentially opposed to you. And what do you do? Like, what do you do? Where do you stand? How do you change? How do you change? It's just an interesting moment. We'll see what happens with people like that. And I know individually people who are not intellectuals and who are not leaders and stuff like that have undergone some shifts. Look, Jonathan Greenblatt, one of the subjects of a long-term subject for Seth in the pages of commentary, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, whom we have excoriated for the way he soft pedals democratic anti-Semitism and liberal anti-Semitism in favor of, because he was a sort of an Obama official and trying to sort of whitewash the Democratic Party. Can't really say that about him anymore. I think it would be fair to say, he's not like come over to our side, whatever that means or not, but, he has understood who the enemy is since October 7th. And so, but Glenn's book there's nothing like it. Witness, maybe. It has a little bit of the quality of Whittaker Chambers' Witness, including, by the way, in the religious, in the sense that Chambers basically says that his political evolution was created by a religious awakening caused by looking into his newborn daughter's ear and saying this thing could not have happened by random accident. The ear, the perfection of the ear. And Glenn goes through his religious awakening, and that's often an element of these kinds of changes. But it's a great recommendation. Late Admissions by Glenn Lowry. We'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.